So happy New Year and welcome back to the Business of Biotech. I'm Matt Pillar, and I've decided it fitting that on the episode that we officially escape 2020, we get back together with all-around Business of Biotech guru and straight shooter Allan Shaw, who you might recall was the guy who helped me frame up the inaugural season of this here podcast back in the spring of 2020. Allan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be back. I can't believe how fast time has passed us by.
It is. I mean, I think it was April that we started this thing, and it doesn't seem as though it's that much time has passed. But, you know, you're my first repeat guest since we launched this thing in April, and I should let our audience know that you'll be my first, and at this point, my only regularly occurring guest in the new year. And Allan, do you have any idea why I'm inviting you to be my first and only recurring guest in 2021?
It must be for my my dynamic personality, my hair, my eyes. I don't know.
Very charming. Yeah, devastatingly handsome. You know, it's because people like to hear your take on things, and we learned that. I mean, early on, right? You were after our trailer, our very first episode, and you're one of our most downloaded episodes from the get. We've had several thousand downloads of the episode that we interviewed you for. So people like to they like your take on things, and that first episode with you definitely jacked up our download averages. So before we get into a conversation about what's to come in 2021 and maybe a little bit about what happened in 2020, I have my assumptions about why that episode did so well. But what's your take? Why do you suppose people are so interested in your take on the space?
It's an interesting question, and certainly one that I ask myself a little bit. And I think I'd say in one respect, in society, everyone has ADD. And, I felt like we were a little bit speed dating as in that first episode. We covered a lot of interesting topics. We covered them very quickly. And so I think it was allowed people to digest them and move on to the other one. So if you're looking at something that orientates you to the business of biotech and gets people out of a little bit of their functional silos, I think it certainly was helpful in that regard. Would be my general sense.
Yeah, and one of the things that I like to do with if you've been listening to the show at all, you recognize that I like to kind of frame up who my guests are when we get before we get into the conversations. You're sort of a difficult one to frame up because you're you. I don't know if Renaissance man is the right term, but I want to frame the question to you this way to help our audience understand your role kind of on the landscape of biotech. Let's say you're at JP Morgan back when there was a JP Morgan to be at, and you're in an elevator and a stranger in a good suit asks you, who are you and what do you do for a living? What's your role in the space? How do you respond to that?
It's a good question. So in my elevator speech, I typically indicate that I'm a biopharmaceutical executive. I think that's really the box I'd like to view myself in. Having been a public company CFO for multiple companies over the years, I'd like to think that I've evolved beyond the typical CFO or financial advisor. And I think the folks that I work with do view me as a business advisor. They view me much more expansive than that. I'm strategic in nature. I understand the different pieces of the puzzle that come together strategically, operationally, tactically, internationally. And I've certainly seen things from a wide array. I've been in big biotechs like Sirona when they were the third largest biotech company in the world. More recently at Syndax, a clinical stage oncology company that we helped take public several years ago. So I've been in entrepreneurial setups. I've been in very large organizations as well. So, also, what good looks like. If you don't know what good looks like, it's hard to get there.
Yeah.
So it's really important to understand that. But also understanding, what makes biotech exciting. It's the entrepreneurialness. It's the ability not to be encumbered by a lot of process. You need control, you need transparency, and you need to be very thoughtful. I think there's a lot of people that make a lot of mistakes. And I think the landscape is littered with that.
Yeah.
So, I think being able to understand that and also because of that, I think it gives me a perspective of being able to call BS on things. There's a lot of people shoveling stuff out there, and not necessarily purposefully. I would characterize it as naively. People just don't know what they don't know. And they're overinformed by academia. They're overinformed by the punch that they're drinking, and people don't necessarily look outside their four walls. And I certainly think because of the breadth and depth of my experience, I think can serve in a lot of different ways. I think your observation's interesting. I think when I've talked to executive recruiters in the past, because of that, I've never neatly fit in a box. In this world, everyone likes to put you into a box. And, going back to your earlier observations, I guess you just have to draw a big box for me.
What does that box entail right now? Tell me, catch me up on the projects you're working on. I read, I think I just read recently that you sign on with, well, depending on your, I guess your geographic area, it's either portage or portage, maybe if you're French Canadian, in the CFO capacity. Tell us about that and what else you're working on of late.
Certainly. I often like to quip that if you buy the stock, you can call it whatever you want. So, I think I generally refer to it as portage biotech. And that's one of, I guess, of my portfolio of activities that I currently involved with. That one's a very interesting one. It's a publicly traded company on the Canadian Stock Exchange. And it's got a really great pedigree group of people. I would characterize them today as a little bit of a mushroom. They've been covered in the dark and not really on the landscape. And that's for a lot of different reasons, and certainly can get into it more specifically. But it's a pedigree team of developers who've really seen it, done it. They were the creators of Biohaven, which has clearly made a lot of money for people. I think their original investment of $7 million yielded, in terms of what they dividended out, about $700 million to the original investors on that. Certainly better than a poke in the eye. Yeah. And right now they're completely focused on immuno-oncology, and like everybody, right? I mean, I would say that there's a lot of oncology fatigue in the landscape. There's just a lot of people doing it, and you have to ask what their angle is and what their edge is. In terms of portage, they have an edge. Basically, the folks leading that one up was the old BMS IO development team. These are the guys that were involved with getting Opdivo, Yervoy approved. They did the Medarex acquisition. And they have a really, really, really thoughtful approach to development. Very risk adjusted. You used one experiment to inform the other, and you don't put any more money into it until you've demonstrated progress and satisfied the certain questions that need to be answered. I think a lot of times people conduct studies and they ask, and they don't necessarily know why they're doing the experiment. What are the answers that you're looking to, what questions are you looking to answer? So, they've been incredibly capital efficient with their development. And, I recently joined them because I thought there was an opportunity to really shine a light on this thing, to expand the investor base, to uplifts them to an exchange such as NASDAQ, and to really start to be able to lower our cost of capital, because I think really one of the gating factors on this company has been its access to capital. And I think if we can get that down cost effectively, the CEO over there has a really an uncanny ability to access really, really interesting, focused programs. And it's really based on the knowledge that they developed, over the years. So that's a company that I'm pretty jazzed about, and why I got involved with them. I'm also involved with a company called Cernomics, also serve as their CFO. That's an RNAi company, clearly one of the modalities of the day, without question. And my perspective on that is that, similar to the antibody phenomena that we saw, a decade or so ago, at the end of the day, really, it didn't matter who you were. All those guys won. And I think RNAi is going to be similar to that. We're seeing that in terms of the life cycle management shift in pharma. The deals are clearly there that speak to it. It's much more targeted in terms of delivery. It's clean, arguably cleaner. Right now it's been primarily focused on orphan diseases, but I think, we're really in the first inning. RNAi is actually one of my favorite illustrations of new modalities and the excitement associated with them, as well as the peaks and troughs with their development. There's a lot of ups and downs. If you look back, RNAi was highly heralded 20 years ago. Yeah. And everybody stood up and clapped and excited, and all the big pharma embraced it, only to unembrace it. And it's a real credit to Alnylam in terms of their perseverance and their ability to really be able to find GalNAc and develop the delivery to the hepatocyte, which has been great. But you're right now, the disease focus is only limited to your ability to deliver to that one cell type in the liver. Mm-hmm. So, if you think about it, if you can come up with additional deliveries, approaches to delivery, that's a game changer in terms of the therapeutic utility and the promise of RNAi. And what attracted me in respect to Cernomics is that they have multiple approaches to delivery. So they have a GalNAc approach. They have what I would characterize potentially as a next generation approach that can go beyond the hepatocyte. And they've got airway, messenger RNAi opportunities to leverage the technology too. So there's a lot of different ways to win. And so I've been focused on helping them out as well. And they've recently raised $100 million on a private round of financing. And, clearly the markets are very hot. I would say there's a lot of momentum investing. And I think you've seen that through the pull through of all the IPOs that have occurred this year, and Cernomics is no different, and that's certainly something that we're preparing to do. And I think we're looking at a Hong Kong IPO in the future. I think that's where as long as the ducks are quacking, we will feed them. And right now the markets are very happy, and with the promise of low interest rates and liquidity for the foreseeable, it looks like this party is going to continue, notwithstanding the fact we're approaching a decade of this. And that in fact is scary because that, it's inevitable, like even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. It's the markets are certainly interesting, and I want to talk about the impact of, maybe overstated, but the impact of the pandemic on the markets in 2020 and moving forward into 2021. I don't even know where you begin with that, right? Like if we look back at try to recap 2020, where do you start? I mean, where do you even start?
It's interesting. When we were talking earlier, you talked about, well, it's been 9 months since April, but that's in human years. How about, I think dog years might be in a more appropriate way to define and measure what 2020 was like. I mean, it's one of those years that, well, it's like the plague in the Renaissance period, right? I mean, that defined history. That was a seminal moment that just really changed the trajectory of a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. In terms of 2020, from my perspective, there's been a lot of dislocation. No question about it. And it's not been equally shared in terms of dislocation. I think as far as our industry's concerned, I would say that the impact has been we've probably done a lot better than a lot of other folks.
Yeah,
It was minimal. I think there's been delays in a lot of studies, in a lot of respects. But I think from and supply chain issues in terms of manufacturing, it definitely has had its impact. No ifs, ands, and buts. But I think in terms of the fundamentals, they're all intact. Mm-hmm. There's been paradigm shifts that are going to wipe out industries as we know them. I mean, just as a side comment, the person that I'm involved with getting my clothing sometimes reached out to me during the summer. Think about it. They've been completely school crushed. Yeah. And my comment to him was, great to hear from you. I hope things are well, but candidly, I've enjoyed working in my bathing suit. Yeah. But I think, seriously, our industry is well positioned and overall, and I think it's changed the way we operate fundamentally. I think if you think about all the efficiency gained from the pandemic, I'm not commuting, I'm not traveling. If I have a board meeting in China, I can have dinner with my family and then go upstairs and attend the meeting and still continue to work, as opposed to spending 3 days getting to the meeting and back again. So, there's also a team building. I think this is really, 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 really important, because I think we are going back to my comment earlier about paradigm shifts. I think fundamentally the way we work has changed. Yeah. And I think that's an opportunity. It creates challenges too. A lot of challenges in terms of how do you maintain connectivity? How do you keep everybody on the same page, rowing in the same direction? Much easier said than done.
Sure. Yeah, we saw that this morning when we sent you a microphone, and we spent 20 minutes trying to get our audio squared away, right, for this call. You mentioned the fundamental change. How much of the change that we've seen, I guess, in the last 9, 10, 12 months, do you anticipate will stick? What will stick, and what will kind of revert back to pre-COVID days?
No, it's a really an interesting question. I think what I perceive will be a positive is that there's going to be probably a little bit less emphasis of people having to work or live in a zip code area of a company. Mm-hmm. And I think from a team building perspective, that's great. You're now no longer limited to fishing in a smaller pond. You've now got a much larger pond to draw the best talent possible. So I think that's a game changer. I think, the idea of people having to have these long commutes, I think will be much more palatable. So, it'll be interesting in terms of how this deals with some of the, what I would call the biotech centers. Particularly when you look at places like Cambridge that are overbought, oversold. And if you're spending money developing drugs, do you want to spend your money on rent? I don't think so. My general view is you want to minimize your overhead, and your money should be spent on value creating activities. Mm-hmm. So I think there will be an opportunity for people to be able to be a lot more capital efficient in their development as a consequence of this. Because
I've picked up on, part of your sort of MO as a CFO is revolves around conservatism, capital efficiency. It's a recurring theme in conversation with you. So tell us, given that the markets are healthy right now, the PR machine is like probably better than it's ever been, at least in a long time for biopharmas, given their our role in addressing a global health emergency. The money's flowing. Is it difficult? Step back and look at the industry on the whole. Is it difficult for biopharmas to embrace that conservatism, that capital efficiency message, and live it, carry it out?
It's an interesting question, and I'd say there's a lot of dynamics that influence how people approach that. Some people approach their money as if it's their bar mitzvah gifts, and they're very incredibly frugal about it.
Yeah.
And there's a benefit in terms of how you approach that. And at the end of the day, you want to be very gated and thoughtful and calculate on how you spend. But on the flip side, the compromise part of it is if you don't spend, you're not executing, and you're not creating value, and time is the enemy. So that's the tension there. And I would say that, going back to your question in terms of responsiveness, in terms of companies, again, it's situational based. There's a lot going back to time. A lot of times people, because of the interest of time, I think some things are not necessarily, all the I's aren't dotted, T's aren't always crossed. And what I would call, validating experiments are sometimes not always done in the interest of being very rushed, or you may not have optimized your dosing appropriately. So you might have something that might work, but from a commercial perspective, it hasn't been optimized. So I think those are different ways, in terms of approach, because of macro demands, micro demands on a company, financing considerations, board pressures, people's response to how they approach those considerations are different. So it's not really a one size fits all in terms of that. What I try to do is try to help people get to that conclusion. It's helpful if it's a consensual conclusion as opposed to a more of a debate.
Right.
Those aren't always. They can be constructive, but you don't really, and if people make decisions, that's great too. It's very simple too. As long as people are making their decisions with their eyes wide open.
Yeah. How much?
And I consider that risk management. And, and as long as people understand what the decisions that they're making, the consequences of their decisions, we're all big boys and girls. But I think it's about making decisions, making informed decisions. Right. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of decisions that are made that are uninformed. And my focus is really helping people make informed decisions. You can lead a horse to water. You can't make them drink.
The Business of Biotech is brought to you in partnership with Cytiva. Together, we're committed to helping the leaders of new and emerging biopharma companies navigate the financial, organizational, human resources, and regulatory waters you'll encounter on your way from discovery to the clinic and beyond. Check out a host of useful resources for biotech leaders at Cytiva's Emerging Biotech Accelerator at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA lifesciences.com/emerging biotech.
How much, I guess, analysis do you do typically before engaging in a contractual or otherwise relationship with a company? How much analysis do you do around the potential for a cultural fit with your mentality on that? Like, are you real careful before you jump into an engagement to make sure that there's not going to be too much conflict in terms of your sort of financial rationale?
It's an interesting question. I in terms of, that philosophy, you try to fill people up. I don't know if I've ever really thought about how my philosophy aligns with those people per se. Mm-hmm. But, to me, it's more about the fit, the chemistry. Are they open? Are they aware of what they know and what they don't know? Yeah. Because, from my perspective, a better fit for me is working with people that are much more scientifically and medically oriented, who the business side is a little bit more of a blind spot to them, and that they're aware of that, and they're looking for people to round out their organization in order to get more thought leadership at the table, more strategic thinking, and a lot of them too. I guess one thing that's an interesting dynamic is that there's a lot of yes people in this world, mm-hmm. And yes people, I'd say the plurality of people are yes people. Are not always free thinking, and if they're free thinking, they will not express their thoughts on that, because it's it's dangerous. It's risky. And it puts them at risk. And, I remember times where I've been in executive management meetings and people have commented that, last person that said that isn't here anymore. or when you say something that's provocative and you look around to see if anybody's going to join in the conversation, and most people have their heads down between their legs under the table. And I'd say large companies, particularly big pharma, I think does have a lot of that mentality. And I would even say in biotech that there's a lot of yes people in there who will just follow orders blindlessly and not challenge it. So, from my perspective, it's a fit. Does it fit? Is there a need? Do they recognize there's a need?
Yeah.
Do they recognize they have blind spots? And are they just open?
Yeah.
And I think that the last part of that is communication, because you need to be able to have effective communication to work together and respect. And those are the things fundamentally that I look at. And then once I get that, the other part is the story, right? What are the business fundamentals? Mm-hmm. And what I like, and coming back to a little bit about big box that we were talking about, I'm involved with immuno-oncology. I'm involved with RNAi therapeutics. I'm involved with cell and gene therapy. I would say if you're looking where investment dollars are going these days, in terms of therapeutic modalities, it's fundamentally concentrated in those areas. Probably orphan diseases would be the next patch to tack onto that. But then I think you're done. From that gives you great breadth and depth and gives you a lot of perspective. And you're getting 3 times the informational flow. So you're getting a lot to learn from in terms of what's working, what's not working.
Sure.
The mistakes that are made, because I think making mistakes are fundamental to learning as long as you make them once. And I like learning from other people's mistakes, and there's a lot of them to learn from.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the shortest distance between 2 points is a shortcut. So if you can learn from other people's mistakes, think about all the time that you've gained at the end of the day. And it also increases your relevancy. So when you're dealing with bankers, you're dealing with lawyers, you're dealing with investor relations, you're dealing with investors, you're just in the flow. And I think all of that feeds on itself. And maybe part of that also goes back to answering some of the questions that you posed to me earlier.
Yeah. What I want to get into some of those modalities as well, because it kind of jives with what we're doing with this podcast heading into the new year. But before we do that, so if you look at a new emerging, let's say preclinical to early clinical stage biotech, is there I guess an understood phase or a particular stage in the company life cycle where it makes the most or better sense to bring Allan Shaw or an Allan Shaw like persona on board?
It's a great question. It's a really good question, and I would say the answer would be sooner than later. Would be my general advice, because there's a lot of times that things are overlooked. Going back to some of the things that are said, there's just things that are overlooked, and it costs you time, it costs you money, and neither one of those you get back. Yeah. So so bringing somebody on, and it's kind of akin to, some people can't afford the cow, but you can certainly buy a steak. And I think, that's sometimes all that's required at the beginning, kind of going back to the box, more of an advisor to help you with some of your capital formation, thinking about your resource allocation, the prioritizations there, and help you leverage your own abilities, because, you don't want the Wizard of Oz, who's the man or gal behind the curtain. So, you do need some of that. So, what I generally advise or coach is that, somebody like I could potentially come in, on some sort of steak basis, a slice of me, and then what you can do, but what you need to do is you need to make sure that the trains are running. So, and I think there's a lot of cost effective ways to keep the trains running, the bills getting paid, and then ultimately, some level of books and records. You want to know, how you're doing against plan, and not a lot. Again, going back to my earlier comment, you don't want to spend a lot of money on overhead.
Right.
That's not where the value gets generated at the end of the day. But you do want to have it so it's somewhat reasonable. And then as things evolve, you can make it more sophisticated as needed. The interesting thing is, my model, a lot of it is a lot of people I think I'm working with, it's kind of a rent to own. So there's a day of reckoning, I guess.
You can only take so much before you got to make the big decision, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. But it does give you what I would call the ultimate in optionality.
Yeah.
In terms of, de-risking. And it's an interesting question, one that comes up at home. Do you want to go in-house for one company, or do you continue doing what you're doing? And, and I would say my fiduciary responsibility rests with my family, my personal stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, never say never. I would just say the bar is certainly higher if I was to go into a permanent operating role, whatever that role might be. I don't know if CFO would be what I would, maybe I would raise the bar on that if I was to consider that. But, I would say that on the other side, I like having a portfolio of activities when you consider the industrial jeopardies, and you see how well others do with a portfolio approach. It's time tested.
Yeah.
I like not having all my eggs in one basket and continuing to collect lottery tickets. You only need one to win.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, and one of those baskets that you referenced a little bit ago was cell and gene as being a pretty hot area. And that's a good pivot point for us, because we're going to spend the next several episodes between now and the next time you and I talk on a Business of Biotech cell and gene mini-series. I've invited our chief editor of our cell and gene site, Aaron Harris, to join me co-hosting this cell and gene mini-series. We're going to spend our time talking with the CEOs of some pretty exciting cell and gene companies like Orchard Therapeutics and Lineage Cell Therapeutics and Axovant, which is now Scio Cell and Gene Therapies, I think they're called now, and more, a bunch of these companies. So what's your take? You mentioned it as being among the modalities that you consider hot right now. What's your take on that space in 2021, cell and gene and beyond? Where's that going?
It is, we entered 2020 with a lot of promise and expectation in that. Valuations were really high. There were a lot of takeouts. And I think, coming out of ASH, there was a lot of encouraging data that came out of that. Certain companies did really, really, really well. I'm kicking myself in the head for not executing on the buys that I wanted to make. But putting that aside, it's the promise is fantastic. I'd say that there's a lot of what's not appreciated is some of the execution challenges related to it.
Yeah.
Particularly in the manufacturing side, I think people fail to appreciate that gene and cell therapy is really an engineering exercise, and it's all about the manufacturing. At the end of the day, and the cost on that is ridiculous. It changed. On one hand, what everyone's embraced, oncology, and particularly orphan indications because it's so capital efficient and quick to get to market.
Yep.
And on the other hand, I would say that gene and cell therapy is the antithesis of that model. And it's very capital intensive. And I think it's going to be harder for folks to, I don't think you have as many shots on goal
Yeah.
You know, you got to pick. You got to pick very wisely, because, you know, if you don't get it the first couple of times, I'm not sure how many more folks are going to fund you coming back to the well. So I think you really going back. I think you really need to de-risk your manufacturing and those earlier processes to improve your probability of success. And I think there's a lot of things you can do to improve your cost area, you know, in terms of your approach. But that's all another day, you know, in terms of your vectors and your platform technology and your promoters. I think there's things that can make things scalable if you think about them more in component parts. And I think partnering with CDMOs are really important. And I think there's a fundamental question about whether or not you need to own the manufacturing yourself, or at least earlier on in a pilot area, to help, again, manage some of those costs and some of those risks. And it's still emerging. It's still early days, but you could see in the landscape that there's certain companies that I think are doing a much better job of that versus other companies at the end of the day. And the other thing that's, I have I'd say there's more questions than answers. You know, I'd also say platform technology, you know, it's evolving. You know, are you making bets on AAV, or are you moving into next generation? So, you know, it's to be told. And, you know, I'd say that's one question. And I think the other question is there's still a little bit of, it's still evolving in terms of the commercial side. You know, these are very, very, very expensive treatments. And I guess you know, until you can demonstrate the durability and the fact that these are typically one and done type of treatments, you know, I think there's going to have to be a lot. I mean, it raises questions of whether or not people are going to jump in the pool right away. You know, it's like software. You know, whenever Microsoft comes up with something, I was never the first one to try their software. You know, you got to let it work its way through.
Yeah.
You know, so not dissimilar in that regard either. And I think the other part is that I think there's going to have to be some risk sharing. You know, I think the model for reimbursement on expensive therapies like that, but certainly I think gene therapy, when you're talking about millions of dollars, is going to have to be some sort of subscription level of payment. You know, you get tested, you got to demonstrate the durability, and then you get paid. And you know, you also have to work that out with insurance companies too, because of, you know, the portability of insurance. You know, because of the way we administer insurance, that becomes very sticky. So you need to figure, and I think that's, again, I think the subscription model is the only way you're going to get around that, because who is going to pay if people are going to turn their insurance over, you know, every 3 to 5 years, you know, similar to employment turnover rates. You know, why would somebody shell out $2 million today to cure you, hopefully, when the benefit's going to be to other people over time?
Right.
So you need to, that's why I think a subscription model is really the only way to go on that. And you still got to figure out how you pass the baton. So when you change insurance, this guy knows you're coming with an insurance liability of X, Y, and Z.
Right.
You know, sorry, we're closed today.
That's some significant liability there for sure.
Yeah. So those are some of the, you know, 30,000 feet thoughts about the sector. Again, exciting. But going back to what I said earlier about RNAi, it took us 20 years to get there, and we're in the backwaters of biotech development for forever. Persona and Grata, you know, Merck exited, Roche exited. You know, if you look at it, it'd be funny. You could almost draw a circle in terms of how these companies have gone 360. So, you know, gene therapy did have issues 20 years ago too. This is really gene therapy 2.0, but I think we're still in the early innings. But the promise is fantastic. And I think also strategically, you know, I think Big Pharma is really thinking about, you know, where they fit in on all of this. And if you observe what they're doing, they're not developing it in-house for all intents and purposes. They're buying into it. And I think that was what we saw at the beginning of the year. And I would anticipate we'll see that again. I think right now people are probably looking for some of these programs to be a little bit more de-risked. Mm-hmm. But, I think some of the companies like Rocket Pharmaceuticals is, in my view, is crushing it. And they've taken a very interesting approach. They haven't really embraced the platform. They've been very agnostic in terms of that. So I think that's it doesn't box you in.
Yeah.
And they've started to invest in manufacturing. So, I have a lot of respect for what Gaurav is doing over there.
Yeah, he's a good plug there. He's one of my early guests on the podcast. Looking forward to having him back.
Very cool.
Yeah, very good interview. All right, we need to start wrapping things up here, Allan. But I want to get your take. It's funny. You think about we're kicking the year off with this episode, and we're talking about reflecting on 2020, looking forward to 2021, as if some magical door is going to close behind us, and 2020 will be forever left in the dust. Yeah, there are a lot of things changing. We've got political change. We've got the vaccine is here now. There are some sort of clear, I guess maybe endpoints and new beginnings heading into the year. But at the same time, a lot of the skeletons in the closet from 2020 are going to follow us into the new year. With that kind of in mind, as we make this at least calendar progression happen, what should pre and early stage clinical founders be most excited about for biotech in 2021? And what should they be most worried about?
No, it's a good question. Good question. I think you're right. There's no magic switch. We're going to wake up on January 1 and maybe we'll be a little lightheaded, but other than that, no changes. Yeah. I would say I think what's different is that in going into 2021, we effectively had the rug pulled out from under all of us. It was incredibly abrupt, and it was with significant force. I would say going into 2021, I think we have our eyes wide open. I think we understand how business is now conducted, whatever the new norm is going to be. I think from a fundamental perspective, 2021 is going to be, I think, more similar to 2020, but it's going to be at least, I think there's green shoots. I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think there's a lot of questions ahead of us in terms of how the vaccination process is all going to fundamentally play out in reality. Yeah. But there's a lot of reasons to be incredibly encouraged and excited. And I think more specifically to your question about CEOs and folks is that the capital markets are flooded with liquidity, and there's really a great time to fund your businesses and capitalize them appropriately. And this might be really an interesting time to, don't just take what you need. I think people always take what they just need, and you never anticipate that the spigot's going to be shut off. But these things come with as much quickness. Right now everything is premised on no zero inflation. If inflation for whatever reason spikes up, and there's an inflation scare, that's going to cause people to sit up in their chairs. So, I think you got to move quickly and expeditiously to get your capital. But that's something I'd be really, really excited about, for sure. But I'd also coach you guys, counsel on the fact that there's also an incredible number of people out there with their hands out, and therefore to be able to differentiate yourself. And demonstrate your competitive edge. That is the most incredible thing, and answer two fundamental questions: why somebody should invest in you, and why now? Yeah. Those are critical. And you only got your initial introduction, and going back to what I said, everyone's got ADD, so you want to make it snappy, you want to make it crisp, and you want to make it impactful.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. What are you personally most excited about beyond spring rolling around again and getting back on the beach and a surf rod back in your hands? What are you most excited about in 2021?
I think the backdrop is really good and it's really exciting. So I think there's going to be a lot more partnerships. I think there's going to be a lot more M&A out there, and I think that all bodes well. because those exits put more money back into the system. And with that, I think, it kind of refuels, what people are doing. From in terms of some of the companies that I'm involved with, I'm looking forward to them to continue to raise their visibility, to continue to expand their investor base, and really continuing to unlock value on a number of different fronts. And it's all about, at the end of the day, it's all about patience. And if we can help accelerate the development of meaningful therapeutics that can really help improve the quality of life for folks, then I consider that a super win, because all of those things ultimately manifest in value creation for everybody.
Yeah.
It's perfect alignment, doing good by doing good.
Awesome. Well, we could go on for hours, Allan. I feel like we could talk for hours, but this isn't the Joe Rogan experience. So I haven't we haven't tested the capacity of our audience to listen to a 3-hour podcast. So we're gonna have to wrap things up and revisit in a few weeks. But as always, thanks for coming on. I'm looking forward to our next chat.
No, absolutely. This was fun, and I look forward to the next episode. Definitely to be continued.
Yep, sounds good. We'll reflect on our post Cell and Gene miniseries. You can reflect on the mistakes and the victories of our guests over the course of the next few weeks. So
awesome! Sounds like a plan.
So that's Allan Shaw. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva. Cytiva is as dedicated to supporting new and emerging biopharmas as we are, and they prove it with an incredible set of resources for biopharma leaders at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Go check that out. Visit us at bioprocessonline.com, and please sign up for my newsletter while you're there. In the meantime, if you like what you heard today, give us 5 stars. Thanks for listening.